those who are involved in making it come to life. Join us as we go behind the door.
Good evening and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Door with the Grey Rooms podcast. I am your host, Brooks Bigley, and returning with me tonight is the author of Season 3, Episode 12, Lachlan Watt, who proves that age is nothing but a number. How are you this evening, Lachlan?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing okay. I'm glad that we are finally able to meet up here. Tell us, where do you live on this planet right now?
I live in Adelaide, South Australia.
Oh man, you're like directly on the opposite end of the planet from me, I think. Actually,
Yeah.
I don't know my geography that well, but yeah, you're far.
Yep, they don't call it the antipodes, nothing.
Is it hot there right now? Like it's February, but is it backwards? Is it hot down there?
Yes, it was quite hot today. It's actually, by Adelaide standards, it's actually been a pretty mild summer. But yeah, today was quite warm. Today was one of the warmer days of the year.
And of course, from your perspective of the world, you look at us like, oh, those people are weird. They get summer in June. That's just bizarre.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Oh, this world is crazy. And speaking of different worlds, this story, this was a heavy one. You brought us back to like the thinking man story. Like this was a lot to take in and to consider and to follow through with. Like, tell us how you started creating this.
I guess, I've always liked that image of the sinister forest. It's something that pops up in horror again and again and again. Some of my favourite works of horror have had this kind of, the sinister presence of the forest. Twin Peaks did a lot with it. The Tannis podcast, a bit of a cross promo there, but the Tannis podcast gets a lot of mileage out of, this image of just these terrifyingly tall trees towering up into the the dark sky. There's a book by Michael Marshall Smith called Spares, and that has a forest in it where it's never really described as a forest, but you get the feeling that maybe it is. And there's things in it like a circle has more than 360 degrees. So if you turn all the way around, you'll be facing in a direction you shouldn't be facing. It's just full of, sort of creepy little details like that.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think of it.
Yeah. And so this image of, the forest, this unfamiliar locale that's just waiting to burst through from its world into ours.
So that was like the very first seed idea you had for this story was the concept of just starting with this forest, this like evil looking forest that then proliferated into the story? Like you worked your way from that pivot point of the story?
I think, I approached this story a little differently to the others. With this one, I deliberately set out to do something different. The two other stories that I've had in the Grey Rooms were both very, they were contained in the one location, and they had this kind of, puzzle box feel to them, where all the elements to the story were there at the beginning of the story. And it was just the way they came to fit together as the story progressed that kind of, was the driver of the plot. And this was a little different.
You gave us 3 different stories, over the course of the Grey Rooms, and each one was wildly different from each other. Like you gave us a science fiction story, you gave us this to me, just a straight up kind of like a serial killer story, and now we have this story, which is just truly unique. And I wish Jason were on the show just to explain to us how he made those sound effects at the end, for all the trees busting through. Like that was the coolest scene I've ever heard in an audio podcast.
Yeah, that was some pretty impressive Foley work. Is it Foley or Folio?
We would say Foley. Yeah, Foley. Foley. Yeah.
Yeah. No, that was some very impressive Foley work on the part of Jason there. I was actually listening to it in the car, and I had to pull over at the end just because I wanted to fully appreciate everything that I was hearing.
And it's almost perfect to be in the car then, because like if you close your eyes, like you've got speakers surrounding you, completely immersing you in the story. So, I mean, I guess headphones would do the same, but I always loved listening in the car, especially to the no sleep, to the great rooms, of course. But you also had so many other layers. I mean, your characters share this past. They're like over 100 years old. You've got this mysterious boss that's like, commanding orders. Give me this. Where's this at? You've got this mysterious grail cup that they drank from this house. Even your just description of the house, like comparing it to like a toy car with just painted on headlights. Like, you had so many deep layers to the story. Like I almost felt like you were writing an onion in reverse, basically, just adding new layers to kind of, to take over the one before it. Like it's such brilliance. Like I want to just like, again, like plug your brain. How did you conceive that? Like, how did you work your way backwards then from that to ultimately come up with this full story?
I think the first draft of the story explained more than it should have. And so for the draft that I eventually submitted, what I did was I went through, and anything that I felt explained too much or gave too much away, I cut that out of the draft. And it was interesting listening back, listening to the version that was recorded, because there was one line in there in particular that I remember agonising over, and I couldn't even remember if I included it or not in the final draft. And of course, when I listened to the story and it wasn't in there, I was like, oh, I guess I left that one out. Probably the right thing to do.
So what would you want to share what that was, or no? You don't have to.
It was actually a little heavy, so
Okay.
Yeah, I think maybe not.
Okay. Yeah, there was such a desire that like I wanted to hear more, but it wasn't like I needed the story to be longer. I just knew that we were getting quick glimpses of so many intermoving parts that made up the story, that could just lead off in tangents, to explain those parts. And that's why it was such a great story. They didn't need to be explained, even though it leaves the listener wanting to have an explanation, I think. So, I mean, it's just an excellent job. The pacing from beginning to end just had me hooked. And again, that ending was creepy, but it wasn't. It just... I just want to know, like, what the situation was with the boss. Like, what was? Would you speak on that? Like, what gave you the inkling to bring this character of the boss in?
He's shorthand for the trouble that you get into when you don't feel that your life is worth living. When you just don't have a clear idea of who you are or why you're worthwhile. And so, the idea that if you lived for so long, you'd eventually find yourself in a place where you'd never be able to imagine things being any better. You would have lost so much by that point. You would have lost, so many relationships, so many friendships, that all would have come to an end. And you'd probably eventually find yourself travelling down some very dark roads and encountering figures like the boss.
Well, and the boss even recounts how he lost his family, basically. And again, the explanation as to why is not necessarily important, I suppose. It's just part of the story, ultimately in the background that led to it. But so many questions. Like he clearly experienced a loss of some kind, and he blames Celia. He blames on her, and... Oh, it's just fantastic. I just want to know more. Like, when does the prequel story come out? Just overall, just such a well done job of just hanging the story in front of our face and just giving us enough to tantalize us to follow you while you dangle it. And then you just keep, it's just brilliant how you led us to the very end of the story. I'm just speechless by it, because I actually listened to it again right before we were doing this interview here, and like this is so impressive. Like, this is such an impressive plot for this story. So many questions, and yet I don't need any of them answered. And it's really hard to even articulate that feeling.
I mean, I think it's always good when you can leave an audience with those kind of questions that they don't want answered, where, maybe it's even best if they're not answered, because whatever the answers might be are never going to necessarily live up to audience expectations. It's like, I think it was George R.R. Martin who said that he never reads discussion of his novels because he's worried that people will have better ideas of how to progress the story than he will.
And maybe that was subconsciously changed, like future writings, you think? Or
Well, yeah. Well, I mean, I think even consciously you're then faced with a bit of a dilemma. If somebody has come up with a solution to a plot bunny that you've been chasing for a while that's far more elegant and considered than anything that you have been able to come up with, what do you do? Is this something, do you pursue this other person's idea, this other person's interpretation of your work? Or do you try and, pretend that you never read it?
Now, have you been on either end of that situation where you were the writer that came up with a clever way to solve something, or that someone did that to one of your writings?
I think every writer who has sort of workshopped their material and showed it to other people and had suggestions thrown at them has encountered that situation where someone else's idea is just so much, someone else's idea, someone else's concept is just so much better than yours, or it just ties something up a lot more neatly than you could. But it's very different when you're soliciting that kind of discussion, or you're having those kind of brainstorming sessions with someone, than if someone just gives you an idea out of the blue.
Yeah, like the collaboration versus just a seed idea, basically.
Yeah. And also, I mean, ideas are free. We have ideas all the time. It's not the idea so much, it's the execution of that idea. If you tell someone something and they go away and they actually act on it, the best example I can think of regarding that is Ghostbusters, where somebody else mentioned the idea of having a franchise dedicated to exorcisms in every city. And Dan Aykroyd went away and then came back with the idea for Ghostbusters.
That was the creation of the original movie.
Yeah. Someone sort of had this offhand idea that you could have, a team of ghost hunters or people that could perform exorcisms in every city, ready to deal with any hauntings that might pop up. But it was Dan Aykroyd that went away and designed the logo, designed the uniforms, designed the whole, how the franchising structure would work.
Adding a little capitalism to exorcism.
Yeah.
And there were capitalistic themes throughout that first movie, for sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Definitely a total 80s movie.
Yeah, they're very consumed by their financial status throughout that film.
Well, then, when it comes to writing, where do you get your ideas? How do you keep writing alive on a daily basis in your life?
I mean, every day I try and write something, even if it's just one line, even if it's just a few paragraphs that I know will never fit into anything. I think it's about finding that voice. You have an idea, you have a concept, but until you know who the person is that's experiencing this reality that you've envisioned, I don't think you've really got a story. Until you have that first line, the first moment that character speaks, I don't really think that you've got anything to go on. So, yeah.
It's like your story's an empty vehicle until you meet your character, basically.
Exactly, yeah. Till you get the driver, you're not going anywhere.
Now, are you of the mindset, like some people are, that like the characters kind of write themselves and you're just kind of the steward there to kind of help them along, if you know what I mean? Like, you're not sitting there plotting out the characters. You're allowing the characters to grow within the limits that you've given them, and that's ultimately writing the story.
When you've got a good character, I think you know instinctively what they would and wouldn't do. When that voice is clear, when the way they handle a situation presents itself organically, when you don't have to go away and think, oh, how does this person deal with this issue that's popped up? I think that's when you've got a good character.
Right. You're humanizing the character, very much so.
Yeah, I don't think it's so much the characters writing themselves, but I think it's when you're tapping into that wellspring of genuine inspiration, their actions certainly suggest themselves to you.
Okay. Maybe there's like a bit of a tandem. Your characters are created by you, of course, but you're giving them their power. You're also aware of the power they have, that you're careful not to, like you said, you get to know your character. You treat them almost as another individual and give them that autonomy, kind of.
Yeah. I think that's why Bill Watterson enjoyed writing Calvin and Hobbes so much, is because he just had such a clear handle on, the two central characters, Calvin and Hobbes, that he could have comics where it was just the two of them, and he'd write the first panel, and by the time he got to the last one, they've had this conversation, they've had this adventure, and really he's just been directing traffic.
Oh yeah, I've been a Calvin and Hobbes fan since I was just a wee lad, and yeah, there's nothing else like it. Nothing can be compared to it, simply because, like you said, like those Calvin and Hobbes had infinite personality. There was so much behind them, but yet in a way that it felt like maybe they could fit, like anyone could kind of see themselves maybe like, yeah, I was mischievous like Calvin when he was little, but I was also very courteous to people like Hobbes. Like they were enough of good and bad. They were enough of a bit of everything, basically. Yeah. So Bill Watterson knew what he was doing.
Yeah. And I mean, your characters are more than just a single aspect of your own personality, but there is always that side to them where you see something of yourself reflected in the way they handle a particular situation. Maybe they are the idealized version of yourself, in that they always have the quick comeback. They always have the solution for the problem that they're facing. Or maybe they embody some of the worst aspects of yourself. Maybe they're unimaginative. Maybe they're a bit too focused.
You can kind of compartmentalize parts of your own, and I'm not saying you, but like a writer could compartmentalize parts of their own personality, not fully, but like you said, parts of, into different characters. Interesting. Yeah, I've never thought of it that way. I just always thought like, you're a good writer, so you're just going to take what you know about yourself and just dump that into a character, therefore making a character similar to you, I guess, which clearly we don't have a bunch of characters who are just like the authors. How much writing do you do? I'm sure we covered this the last time you interviewed with us, but like, what, you're writing every single day? Do you have many stories under your belt already?
I do have a few. I'm not entirely sure how many. I've got two folders. One's for finished fiction and one's for unfinished. And they've probably each got about 20 files in them. Some of the finished stuff has been published. Some of it was sent off and rejected. And I'm not sure if it needs to be reworked or abandoned. One of them I'm actually thinking of submitting for season 4 of the Grey Rooms, just because I think it'd be a much better fit than for the publication that I originally pitched it to. I've got a novel and a novella that I've finished. So they're sort of the longer pieces of writing that I've completed.
But they're released or they're published, or they're just soon to be published?
Well, hopefully the novella is soon to be published. It's gone through a few reworkings at a publisher's request, and I think it's getting pretty close to its final form now. I think there should be very little that needs to be changed.
That's awesome.
Let's hope that this year, it was something I spent all of 2020 working on. I think the headspace that a lot of us found ourselves in during 2020 was actually it certainly became a big element within the story. Just this kind of, the oppression of this emptiness that you feel whenever you step outside and just know that things just aren't the same.
Right. Everything is different. Everything.
Yeah. I mean, my son is 3 now, so he's going to be, he's going to be forming memories. Sorry, my washing machine was playing a jaunty little tune.
That's amazing. In Australia, your washing machines sing to you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. I know. I hear about your son. Yeah, he's 3, and his memories are going to be this pandemic that the world is under, basically.
Yeah, he's going to have memories of this time, of probably the people involved, the people that he sees giving press conference every night on Australian TV. Some of the political events surrounding 2020 are probably going to make an impression in their own way. Without naming names, there's certainly some people that he recognises when he sees them on TV. So
I know what you mean.
Yeah, that's been interesting, seeing him formulate his opinions of those particular figures and express himself in a forthright manner.
The kids love doing that. I have 2 young kids too, so I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, you'd know it's a real buzz to sort of see the world through their eyes sometimes. Yeah. It's interesting also that he's gravitated a bit towards, I won't call it horror, but let's call it spooky stuff. That seems to be the acceptable term for things that you allow a 3-year-old to watch.
Well, clearly you normalize scary things in your household, right? I mean, you write some crazy, horrific stories. So it's the same in my household. My young kids love horror.
Yeah. I mean, I remember from a very young age being fascinated by the scarier side of, we had video stores when I was a kid.
Right.
And the first thing you do when your parents aren't looking is head for the horror section and start peeking at the backs of all the boxes, trying to freak yourself out.
Yeah, those covers or those movies from like the 80s and even like the early 90s they were so frightful. But yeah, you're right. You were so addicted to wanting to go see what else there was it was like wanting to see a train wreck, basically.
Yeah. I think the smell of those old plastic clamshell cases that VHS cassettes used to come in, always touches off memories.
I still have a bunch of CDs and boxes in my closet because I just can't get rid of, like, to me, it's like, no, I know I can download that or, digitally stream it, but to get rid of the CD to me seems like I'm losing that music. It's a very nostalgic way that we connect, whereas your son, in a couple more years when he's got his own little iPod, won't even know what a CD is, nor would he care whether he held on to one or not.
Yeah. We actually found some CDs the other day in a box that came with us when we moved. We're in the process of building a house at the moment, so we have a box full of, items that we dragged with us, and one of them was a box of CDs. And he was very excited by the idea of physical media. So we found a CD. He picked one out by the cover. and it was uh, it was Fun 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 by Feed Time, an old Australian band. And if you've never heard Feed Time, you should definitely look them up. Quite interesting. Yeah, and you got to experience the joys of, and the only place I've got a CD player now is in my car. So we got in the car, we put the CD on, and I took him for a drive. We listened to, he experienced the joys of driving around aimlessly while listening to some antisocial music.
It's nice that you can still keep that going. I love that. Little traditions, just keep them going. That is awesome.
Proud tradition.
Yeah, and especially in this day and age, like I always tell my kids, like, I had to wake up on Saturdays to watch cartoons and get my cereal and then sit through commercials and like you knew what time your favorite shows were on. None of this like, oh, it's 7:15 p.m. and I just want to watch some cartoons right now, so I'll stream it on my iPod. Like there's such an immediacy that loses, I think, the magic of just those bygone eras, I suppose.
Definitely, yeah. The accessibility and ease with which you can experience these things. You're right. It does rob it of some of its impact.
But I mean, that's. I'm sure that when the car was invented, people said, "See, look, now nobody's going to walk anymore. Everyone's just going to sit on those little horseless carriages." So there's always the previous generation will always complain about something. So it's just us now. We're just the old guys complaining about we want our CDs back.
Indeed.
But you're doing right by your son by making those little traditions, showing the CD, touching the CD, putting it in the machine. Even though it's the same song you can maybe stream, it's the little process. It's watching your grandparents play a phonograph record. It's just an experience. It's its own experience. So,
and he never would have been interested in that music if it hadn't been on CD.
Right.
If I just tried to play it to him on the phone or something like that, he wouldn't have. He would have told me to stop bothering him.
Right. There's no process behind that. It's just the same as every other song that gets played. Yeah. There's that immediacy. There you go. So he appreciated it almost in the way it was meant to be appreciated without even being taught to appreciate it that way. Very interesting.
Exactly. Well, I think a big part of these movements is the medium by which they are transmitted. Podcasts are very much their own thing now. Something like the Grey Rooms. It's creating fiction that's not a book. It's not a TV show. It's very much its own thing. It's its own format. And it's a brave new world in many ways. I was listening to an episode of Archive 81. I probably spoke this last time we spoke, but it's called The Space You Are Currently Occupying. And I was listening to it and thinking, this is something that you couldn't do in any other medium. You couldn't do this in a book. You couldn't do this in a TV show or a movie. A podcast is the only place where you could try a narrative like this and pull it off like this. And it made me conscious of the fact that this is the new frontier that we're venturing into, a new way of telling stories.
Right. And podcasts are so young. Like they've only been, I know podcasts have been around for 15 plus years, but I feel like it was only in the 2010s that they really started to pick up. Either in popularity and usage and just people understanding what a podcast was. So we're still at the very beginning of it all.
Yeah, and approaching it as its own medium with its own set of limitations and capabilities. And rather than trying to do something the way you would do it if you were telling a story in another medium, building this entirely new sort of set of tools for making people feel a certain way.
Right. Yeah, we talk about that in many different ways between authors and actors, just on these behind the door shows that it's just beautiful the way that people can get together without physically being in the same room and yet make such high quality the same as, let's say, in comparison to maybe a certain type of television show on TV or whatnot. And yet still, yes, it's its own unique medium. You can't just get a TV writer and TV producer and then hopefully bang out a great, decent podcast. They might not, nail it the right way. There's audio cues that you need to express to have listeners of a podcast episode understand the action happening, right? Because you can't see it, but you can hear it. But you can't just blindly hear action either and simply guess what's happening. So, yeah, it's a total unique medium, definitely.
It's quite something when I listen to a podcast and I focus on, an exchange of dialogue, and I think, well, were these actors in the same room when they recorded this? Were they actually delivering these lines to each other, or did they each record their part independently and then send it in? Or when I listen to a piece of Foley work and I think, well, this, is this a stock sound effect? Is this something that's been, created artificially? Is this someone going outside with a boom mic and, I don't know, dropping a rock on a cabbage or something like that?
Right. That's why, I wish Jason were here to talk about little sound effects because, without revealing anything from other episodes, like I know some of the ways he's achieved sound effects and he's done things with existing sounds, that you would never think of to create. Because you would, like you said, if the sound calls for glass breaking, are they actually breaking glass? Well, that's kind of a simplistic, idea. But like a car crash could be a makeup of 8 other different sounds that sounds like a car crash, but it's not. Or you could have recorded a real car crash. You don't know. But it's the clever ones know how to mix things that have nothing to do with the actual sound and make it sound like that thing. And Jason knows how to do that.
And when you're asking yourself those questions, you're probably doing the same thing as people used to do when they were, everything's CGI now. And it doesn't have quite the same, I guess, magic to it. When people would go and see, the Christopher Reeve Superman and watch him fly, and they'd sit there in the cinema thinking, well, is he really flying? Are there strings attached? Is this some kind of green screen? When you're starting to dissect a medium like that, I think it can go to some very interesting places.
Right. And comparing old ways of doing things versus new ways. Like sometimes you'll hear people say like, oh, well, podcasts just evolved from literally, 80 years ago from radio plays. Basically the same thing. The only difference really then would be that I guess podcasts are very, you can consume them passively. People didn't really carry radios around with them all over the place listening to radio plays back in the 40s. But other than that, it was almost the same-ish. Like, we need to explain this physical action to listeners who can't see anything. So it was a way about going scripting and writing those stories versus a regular, let's say, TV show or something.
I think the big difference would be the durability.
Standing the test of time?
Yeah, things that were broadcast, most media broadcast before 1950 is lost. It's been destroyed.
Right. Like, because physically it can't last that long. It's on not even macrofiche, but I know what you mean, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Or it was broadcast live and there was never a recording made. There was a lot of TV that was broadcast live in the 50s. And when you're sending a podcast out into the ether, I think there's an understanding there that once something is on the internet, it might very well be there forever.
Yes, that's almost a curse, actually.
Yeah, the internet might outlast the human race.
Right.
We've built this thing that just it doesn't quit. There's always going to be an internet of some kind. And I think when you create anything, even on a subconscious level, and you put it on the internet, you understand that it's there forever. Someone is always going to be able to access it.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. There's no turning back once it's on the internet. It is forever living there. So, and that's great. That's great for media, I think. But then again, maybe what if the curse behind that is that, so like we mentioned about, or I mentioned about music earlier, that sure, I can download it or stream it, but I own the CD to the album, so I forever, me personally, will forever have that album as long as I can keep that CD intact. Whereas my downloads can be deleted or taken away if I break my phone and can't repair it, or if the company streaming it decides, oh, the copyright is no longer valid. Now I don't get streaming rights anymore. So it's not permanent. You know, I mean, there's caveats behind everything, basically.
There's also the matter of things being edited. I've experienced myself. I've watched films on streaming platforms, and I've been waiting for a certain image or scene or sound effect or frequently a song to show up on the soundtrack, and then it just doesn't. And it's because the version that's on the streaming site has had that, chunk of its original production surgically excised.
Right. Which renders it not a complete work of content, basically. Or it needs to be changed for silly reasons, kind of.
Yeah. The music one is particularly frustrating. The idea that you cut a song out of a particularly TV series. I know the version of Neon Genesis Evangelion, or Evangelion rather, that's on Netflix has the original credits music missing. They've replaced it with kind of this ambient track that they can clearly get away with not paying the song. It's probably something that's in the public domain, or it's under a Creative Commons license.
Right. Yeah. It's outlasted its copyright, basically.
Yeah. And I think someone said Dawson's Creek, the theme song, is missing.
Oh, no. Why is that, though? But the show is not missing, just the theme.
Yeah, just the theme song. Well, I guess it's the deal that was done when the song was originally contracted as the theme didn't apply to streaming platforms that maybe didn't exist.
Interesting. That really kind of puts a wrinkle in the whole... like the specific, the genre that you're interested in, the fan base.
Yeah, because it's an iconic, regardless of what you might think of Dawson's Creek, everybody recognizes that theme song.
All right, it's part of the show.
Yeah, and if it's not there, is it really Dawson's Creek anymore?
Man, we're just going way philosophical now.
Yeah.
I totally know what you mean, though. Yeah, it's like an incomplete work. It's like imagine Star Wars without that beginning music in the narrative crawl. Like how that's not Star Wars.
No, it's not. Well, Star Wars is a good example because it's already been altered so many times by its original creator. He's added updated effects. He's swapped actors out. He's swapped the voice acting on the stormtroopers.
That's true.
It's like, I don't.
It is not the original Star Wars anymore.
Yeah, that's very, very true. And I don't really think you should be doing that.
Right. It's kind of like what it was is what it was, and that's what everyone loved, and that's the classic, and that's what it was. And then re-releasing it, and then re-releasing the re-release. Like, yeah, it does get a bit capitalistic. It's a bit much. It does kind of maybe sully the fan base.
I think the human race is developing a bit of anxiety regarding these permanent forces that we have brought into being that are going to be around long, long after we're all gone. And that was something that I tried to tap into with my story. There's the idea that there's just this eternal, malevolent presence that will try all of these ways to inveigle itself into our reality before finally just, completing the right sequence of actions that will allow it to burst through like it does at the end.
Right. Yeah. Your story was very
Not
mythological.
not saying I wrote it as an allegory for the internet, but
Yeah.
you've got to, all this anxiety has to go somewhere.
That's a really interesting take. Yeah. So this story was written did you write this last year in 2020?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Along with everything else that was going on, I was mainlining a lot of true crime and conspiracy content, just trying to get I guess, get myself into a slightly paranoid headspace, just to see, making a conscious effort to do so, just to see if it would have any input into my, creative process.
Yeah. I love how conscious you are of your creative process, of just different ways of thinking about coming at it. Like you've already expressed that throughout this interview, just different ways that you present of what causes you to write the way that you do. Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
I very much like that. Can you tell people if there's anywhere on social media that they can find you, either to find the things that you think about in the words that you spew, or even just places to read your stories? Is there anything like that on the internet?
So you can find me on Twitter. I'm Lachlan J. Watt, all one word on Twitter. And anytime I have anything sort of coming out or coming up, I tend to spruik it on Twitter. I also just love chatting about writing, about all different genres of fiction. Horror and science fiction are clear favourites, but I'll chat to anybody about anything related to the process, really. I know it's not everybody's experience, but I greatly enjoy being on Twitter. I've had a really fun time, and I wouldn't have gotten involved in things like the Grey Rooms and quite a few other projects if it hadn't been for signing up on Twitter.
Right. Yeah. I agree with you. I hear a lot of toxicity, on Twitter. But in terms of the horror community and writing and authors and like all of this that we're in, like it's always very communal and very supportive and just very familial or family oriented, basically. So that's great that you and so many other people have come out, writing because of it.
I think the horror community in particular is very good at policing toxicity when it pops up. So if you're a horror fan and you maybe got some reservations about, jumping into conversations that you see happening on Twitter, I'd say go for it. Like, people have been great. I've had a great time, and when people maybe aren't so great, there's a lot of people there that will let them know that their behaviour is not appreciated. So
right, yeah. Gotta love Twitter, but not really. Twitter's just the place to hang out. Gotta love this horror community. It's I truly like seeing people hold each other accountable. I don't ever see people let other people slide. So that's a great thing, and that's just how humans can probably get along better. Hold each other accountable, always. So.
Absolutely. I've I won't say Twitter's been a big influence, but I've certainly learnt that certain conversations don't require my input.
That's so hard to learn.
Being a relatively privileged straight white man, not to get too political, but there are certain conversations that really don't require my input.
Right. And when I'm laughing is because I agree with you. That is the mature, responsible answer right there. And a lot of people struggle with that. They think nothing more than just right in that moment. They got to say something and it's going to be how they feel and it fuck everybody else. There's a lot of that out there. So I like your answer.
Chances are if you really if you see something that makes you feel really strongly about it, all you need to do is scroll down, and it's guaranteed that somebody else has had exactly the same thought as you. They haven't thought twice about posting it up, and you can watch them get dogpiled instead for the bad opinion that you would have expressed had you not taken a second to pause and find that somebody had already expressed it.
Right. Exactly. But we just all want to be, we want to be right there. That one funny quip or that one, I'll be the one that makes everyone finally realize the truth. Yeah, that's hard to avoid.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, thanks for joining us tonight and letting us peek under the universal mechanism that governs all realities. I appreciate you taking the time to sit and chat, Lachlan. And I thank you for sharing your world with us here in the Grey Rooms.
It's always a pleasure, Brooks. Thank you so much, and thank you to Jason and the rest of the crew for bringing my story to life. It's always just a buzz on another level.
Absolutely. And as usual, the biggest thank you goes out to our fans and followers who listen daily and spread the good word of Bob. Be careful what you bring back. Interdimensional compatibility isn't always guaranteed. #stay gray. Take care and enjoy your evening, Lachlan.
Thank you so much, Brooks.
And good night, folks. Bye.
Join us each week after every episode for another edition of Behind the Door.